All right, good morning. Good morning. We have two different time frames up. We have the daily chart and then an hourly time frame. Generally, how I start the morning. Every morning, you need to start something in the same fashion by looking at certain stocks to see. Now, if we're checking gaps, we need to check. And what I love about gaps is the sentiment behind the gaps. When it gaps above a prior pivot or a red candle, they all mean something and it tells us something in the process. And that's the sentiment of that day and what's going to happen. So what we're doing is we're going to first look at Tesla. And we're going to understand that Tesla did in fact put in a lower high. Okay, so trend changing, it was selling off. This is the prior pivot high on Tesla, and we're right at the prior pivot high. Now, it would make sense. Remember, when we talked about this a couple days ago, or possibly yesterday, we don't want to be a buyer where there are sellers at. Now, could the stock continue? Absolutely. Have we seen some pretty remarkable things come out of Tesla when it comes to just busting through a resistance? Absolutely. But what I'd like to see a pullback, and that would be terrific, validating these blue EMAs down here, that green and blue EMA. Now, if you're wondering what EMAs I use, it's 180-day moving average, exponential moving average, and then the 50 exponential moving average. I'd love to get a pullback into that and create another higher low and then break the pivot high. Now, if we get above the pivot high, that's terrific. But I'm going to go ahead and make sure that we have the understanding that this is definitely a resistance for that stock, okay? And we need to be aware of that. Now, ROKU is supercharged, as we said yesterday. So it's looking really good. It did take off, and what we're looking at is these lower lows, lower highs, and then it did break the prior pivots. And here is the last pivot high. So we built a nice flag yesterday. Now it's ripping to the upside. So some of the areas that we need to make sure, and we're watching it, and if we look at this consolidation area, we mentioned yesterday that this was the indecision bar. If we were to add these two candles up, tail and a tail, where are we at currently? And if we go ahead and mark a line in the chart for that, so we have an idea of where we're at pre-market. Here's pre-market. We're definitely breaking above. Now, what we'd also like to do is let's go back and retest the top of that. That would be really neat. We also have the gap fill down here. So if we get down here, it would validate that EMA. So could it continue? Absolutely. And if it does, hey, no worries, because we do have some resistance ahead. And that would give us a really good idea of where the stock may run into, and then just start pulling back. We have this right here, and then we're also going to have this over here. So these are some of these levels that we really want to pay attention to. I'm going to change them all to a different color because we really, I keep the same colors. Like this would be blue because it's the gap fill, okay? And I do want to understand where the gap fills are at. So I'll go back and change those. We do actually, let's paint in the gap fill down here, which would be yesterday's high of where it closed. So we'll leave that one as the actual pivot, or excuse me, the gap, okay? So I do like ROKU. I'd love to see it pull back, and if it continues, it's all good because they do pull back, and then we could be looking for a pullback. The higher up they go, good for us as far as the uptrend. Now, Facebook caught our radar, ended up on our radar because it put in quite a nice run down. But this is the thing that we wanted to understand as far as on the daily chart, and this is why I kind of wanted to bring it up. We have all kinds of alerts set down here because I'm going, hey, if Facebook does pull back, I want to be aware of it. But this is the deal. When we're looking at pivots, we just broke the prior pivot low. And then what we're doing too is Facebook has been on a really nice uptrend, and it just keeps making higher highs. And so this is the first time that it's done something kind of like the SPY where it broke that pivot low. It is on a topping formation, and came right down. So now we're looking for a recovery on Facebook. I don't know. It looks like there's some news out on Facebook. For those of you who are wondering, this is the Webull platform that we use, and they do have a lot of different resources that we can look at the stocks, which make look into the stocks, which makes it nice for trading. So we'll read it on the catalyst, whatever the case may be, if there is some significant news. But I am looking for a recovery. We did put in a double bottom yesterday, and double bottoms are very strong. So we have two lows, and then we have this neckline right here. And as long as we get over that neckline, if we can get up there, reject the moving average, I may be a buyer right around this level at the neckline at 340. What is that? 346.75, okay, roughly. And so that's something I want to be paying attention to, especially if it's going to start moving in the upward direction pretty quick. Now, speaking of pivots, this is kind of why I wanted to get into certain stocks, because we've been waiting for these stocks, and they finally are breaking through those prior pivots and putting in those higher lows. So we have ourselves a higher low, we have a pivot, it's now over the pivot, and we could be looking for SQ to go ahead and pull back. What we're waiting for is time to catch up to price a little bit. So once again, we painted it out. We have the higher low setups. Here's the prior pivot. We broke the prior pivot. Now that's a sign of an uptrend. We don't want to be catching it when it's got several uptrends. Then we're buying too late and we're being a buyer where there's sellers at. So what I would really like to see SQ do is pull on back. We do have a gap fill that we could be paying attention to. So there's the gap, and then this is where we're currently sitting at. Okay, and so if we do pull back and we decide to move, but pay attention, we're right up into, we moved right up into starting to get an area of resistance. So those are the type of things we need to be aware of. We're also extended off the EMAs. Could we continue? Absolutely. But would it be a lot neater if we pulled back and into two EMAs with some support? I would definitely be a buyer on SQ down below. And that would also validate right off the top of the old pivot, which is perfect, picture perfect at that point. And that's where we're at. We're kind of out of time. I want to keep them short so we can upload them before the market opens. We were looking at DraftKings, GM, put in a different pivot. You could check those out, mark out your different pivots, and see how that works out for you. If you find this information useful, please subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, and one more thing, hit the thumbs up button for me.